Welcome to Toksave, Culture Talks, the podcast of PARADISEC, the Pacific and Regional Archive for Digital Sources in Endangered Cultures. I'm Jodie, Kell.
And I'm Stephen Gagau. These are conversations with people who have personal and cultural connections to the languages and music in our archive.
As producers of this podcast, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which it is recorded and pay our respects to their elders past and present. We extend that respect to all First Nation contributors and listeners, and please be aware that this podcast may contain the voices of deceased people.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Toksave Culture Talks podcast series. It is a live recording of a panel called Opening the Archives, Indigenous Perspectives on the Importance of Engagement with Archives on Wednesday the 8th of October 2025.
The panel was part of a Sydney Conservatorium of Music library exhibition curated by Stephen and I to showcase some of the equipment, audio techniques and innovative solutions used by PARADISEC to safeguard valuable audiovisual materials for the future and to open the archive through outreach projects.
The panel presented First Nations perspectives on archival practices, focusing on the importance of creating ways to connect and reconnect with heritage materials. Chaired by Dr. Amanda Harris, it included Dr. Lauren Booker from the University of Technology, Sydney, Evelyn Gispe, a PhD student at the University of Sydney, Johnny Obed, a Ni Vanuatu from the Sydney Wantok community, and myself.
We now hand over to Amanda Harris to introduce the panel and guide the discussion.
Hi everyone. Thanks so much for coming along to this event, PARADISEC Opening the Archive, Indigenous Perspectives on the Importance of Engagement with Archives. I want to start by acknowledging the country that we're on. We're here on Gadi country, and this has always been Aboriginal land. It's a very important site. It's obviously now where the Sydney Conservatorium of Music sits, but for many more years than this building has been here, it has been a place where people have sung songs, have made music together, have looked after this place through the holding of culture and through the singing of songs. And much more recently, when Europeans came here, they documented women coming ashore just down the hill from where we're sitting now, singing a song as they disembarked from a canoe after fishing, and those songs are written down in some of the early records. In some of the places just around where we're sitting, there were corroboree grounds and places where people came together for important ceremonies. So this has always been and continues to be a place of music making. And sitting as we are in a place now that has a building of a certain structure, I think it's a really important thing that we do each time we gather together to remember the country we're on, have it at the front of our minds. And I think this practice of thinking always about culture and country is also at the heart of what those of us who are gathered together on this panel are thinking about all the time. And so it's a way to start some bigger conversations we're all having today as well. So thank you for being here with us for that. And I am Amanda Harris. I work here at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music. I'm a research fellow here, and I also am director of the Sydney office of PARADISEC and work closely with Stephen Gagau and with Jodie, Kell and our other team members here. And so I'll just give those of you who may not be familiar with PARADISEC a quick overview of the context that brings us all together, which is largely a digital archive of language and music materials, cultural materials, particularly from the Pacific region, but also from all over the world. PARADISEC, the Pacific and Regional Archive for Digital Sources in Endangered Cultures, as we named it 20 years ago, or more than 20 years ago when the archive started. These days we often talk about the languages and musical practices and cultures of small language groups. But this project was created in 2003 to try and look after really high-value cultural heritage materials that had been recorded, often audiovisual materials had been recorded sometimes decades ago, but were sometimes sitting completely inaccessible to anybody on a tape medium that no one had the player to play in someone's filing cabinet. So when the project started, it was about digitising all those materials and making them accessible. Now, 20-something years down the track, we're really very focused on how we can make those incredibly valuable cultural heritage materials that are in the archive accessible to those to whom they matter the most, especially to the communities of language speakers that they come from, to the people who own that cultural heritage, and to continue research with those materials in collaboration with communities. Some of the ways we do this are by designing an online catalogue that really has the technological capacity to make things accessible. That means that people all around the world can log in, assuming people have internet access, which of course is not always the case, but get straight to the materials that we hold in the archive. They can listen to them. We have the capacity for things to be transcribed, and so someone can listen to a recording and follow along a transcription and a translation. We also, because things in our archive have incredible value in lots of different ways, sometimes in ways that are restricted to different people, there are also ways to restrict access to what's in the archive so that it's only accessible to people who have the rights to listen to it. And so this has been a project that's been built over more than 20 years. That is the kind of underlying prompt for this panel today and for the exhibition. But what we're really talking about today is the way that this really wonderful panel of guest speakers are working with archives in lots of different ways, both from theoretical perspectives and really thinking about policy and changing the ways that we have access to archives and have used them in the past and might need to use them in the future. And also from very localised levels, how people in local communities are accessing their own materials, how they are making meaning of them now, making new uses that might be unforeseen at the time those old recordings were made. And so we're going to go through a series of different kinds of discussions today. And I'll start those discussions first by introducing all of the wonderful people next to me. So right here on my right is Dr. Lauren Booker. Dr. Lauren Booker is a Gagau postdoctoral research fellow in the Indigenous Archives and Data Stewardship Hub at Jumbunna Institute for Indigenous Education and Research at the University of Technology, Sydney. And she's a member of the Indigenous Archives Collective. We'll talk a bit more about that. Lauren has worked across the Australian galleries, libraries, archives and museums sector, and she works on projects supporting First Nations communities and organisations to access Indigenous cultural and intellectual property held in collecting institutions. And then next to Lauren is Stephen Gagau. Stephen Gagau is an Indigenous Tolai Gunatuna man from Papua New Guinea who is a cultural consultant and archivist at PARADISEC, works in our Sydney office here. He focuses on archival and curatorial metadata enrichments for Melanesian Pacific collections through connections and collaborations with community outreach projects, such as co-producing the Toksave Culture Talks podcasts. And Stephen was cultural researcher on the True Echoes project, a collaboration with the British Library that he and I worked on together, reconnecting Indigenous communities with historic audio recordings from across Oceania. And then next to Stephen is Evelyn Kispe. Evelyn is an Indigenous doctoral candidate here at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music. She's from the Quechua people located in the Andes Mountains of Bolivia. And her research focuses on exploring and revitalising Walpri women's songs, known as Yawalyu, as part of the broader project Rethinking the Dynamics of Place in Walpri Performance, an ARC DECRA project led by Dr. Georgia Curran. So she works in Central Australia with Walpri people. And then making up the far side of our panel there is Johnny Obed. Johnny is a former Ni Vanuatu educator and church leader, now based in Sydney, from Palmer Island in Vanuatu. He's an active member of the Wontok Association of Sydney, a representative body for Melanesian people in the diaspora. And Johnny has featured in not one but 2 Toksave Culture Talks podcast episodes, sharing his knowledge of the culture of Palmer and Vanuatu, as well as his perspectives on the value of connecting with archival collections. So as you've heard, we've really gathered together people who are both closely working here at the University of Sydney and the Sydney Conservatorium of Music, and also people from further afield. And I think it's really wonderful for you all to have come along to talk with us all today. Lauren, who works over at Jumbunna Institute now, some years ago, we used to share an office over there at PARADISEC. And so could you tell us something about those long ago days working with PARADISEC between 2016 and 2018? Because at that time, you were working on some women's only song traditions from the Central Desert region that had been recorded by Linda Barwick and Jane Lloyd. And you and Jodie Kell did some interesting work on protocols for working with those recordings and all kinds of other stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a place to start.
Okay, sure. Prior to me moving over to work at Jumbunna Research Institute in the team there, which is led by Dr. Kirsten Thorpe, I was here at PARADISEC for, I think, from the end of 2015 to 2018. And I think maybe just before I try to speak about those projects. Just for context, I really cut my teeth on working in archives here at the con at PARADISEC. Prior to that, I'd mostly spent time working in artists like ARIs, like artist-run galleries, and when I say working, I use that term lightly. And also in the museum sector as well. I'd done some work over at the Macleay Museum at the University of Sydney, and I used to work at the Met. So I was in a different realm. And I had the amazing opportunity to come and work on the CLC project. I believe it was a massive ARC at the time. I think that was when I even learnt the term ARC and what that, I had really just had no, I didn't have a lot of experience in academia and archives at that point. And so starting my archives trajectory, which I've been in ever since, having that be here at PARADISEC has been, I think, very formative because of the way that PARADISEC is structured and the way that it works and the intentions for PARADISEC. It's such a, there are other places like it, of course, but for me at that time, I really only understood archives as being public institutions or private, private kind of like church archives or business archives, and I didn't. It was my first experience looking at research data archives and a place that was so focused on the preservation of cultural materials, the preservation of archival materials meant connecting with community and the communities whose materials they are. It was the first time I really had experienced behind the scenes like a more living archive, and it was a really formative time for me. And I think that a lot of my and it's really laid a foundation for a lot of my other work, where it's a bar, and it's a very particular place because it's unique. It's based on relationships. It's small, even though it does have a big digital footprint. But when you look at other archives like NAA or like the state and territory or federal government archives that we have, it is very unique. And very based on relationships. And I really experienced that when I was working on that project, led by Linda, Dr. Linda Barwick, and with Jodie, we realized that we had a entirely women-led and run workflow, well, office and project. And the project was specifically working with Warlpiri women, with songs and knowledge that had gendered access protocols attached to it. That was made very clear, and we realized that we had the opportunity to kind of formalize what we were doing. So rather than it just being that we had the ability to really adhere to a cultural protocol around gendered access, we started talking about how can we communicate this with the women and with the community and see whether that was something that they were interested in us kind of, I guess, formalizing more. And so we realized that we had the ability to have women doing the recording, women in the community also, engaging with the recording and leading that project. And then we also had women being couriers, and I did that one time, like a hand courier, terrified, sweating on the plane that I just couldn't, leave the chair with and leave this item, like hand couriers back to PARADISEC, where we'd started these digitization workflows. We had we had Jodie as an audio engineer, and myself. I have a background in digitization of photographic material, so I was also able to do that. And we could assure the women that it was a cyclical, it was a river, that this knowledge was kind of moving on, and that there was transparency there around what we were doing and how we were doing it. And I think that was the first time that I'd experienced that. And experienced the care for archival materials, and that's become a massive part of my work and the work that I want to continue doing in the future, that I think is really important, that I think we all, which I'm looking forward to hearing you all talk about as well. You're caring for material, you're caring for knowledge, and you're caring for community and country by engaging with archives in a way that sees them as important and significant and needing that care and consideration.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. That's such a nice segue to talk to Stephen more about, because in a way the torch has been passed to Stephen from your work early in about 2018 actually was probably when Stephen joined us too. Yeah, so there was a crossover there. And just in the way that you were talking then about the care being taken through that workflow led by and passed through women, Stephen has really cared for and generated relationships between what happens in the archive and the community in ways that are very specific to his cultural context. So Stephen, would you like to talk to us a bit about some of the work that you've done to make those connections between what's in the archive and the local community? And one of the recent examples was with the Paraveda singers of Canberra, but just sort of generally reaching out to the diaspora community of Papua New Guineans in Australia.
Thank you, Amanda. Okay, I'll basically start by saying that I will speak as a PARADISEC staffer, being part of the team in PARADISEC, and I will focus more on my perspective as an Indigenous man that looks at the importance of engagement with archives and what it means. So it's no point having an archive that has this storage or preservation and safeguarding all these materials if it doesn't get out of there. It needs to connect and bridge back to communities. So I will start by 3 points. I joined PARADISEC for a 6-month casual project, and I'm still there. And that was on archival metadata, enrichment of Papua New Guinea collections. And then I realized and recognized that the archive holds so much cultural heritage and primary research materials of Papua New Guinea, Melanesia, and across the Pacific region. So I thought that was the first time for me to actually discover that there was materials of cultural heritage that sits in an archive that nobody knows about. So I didn't even know that before I entered PARADISEC. Secondly, we must acknowledge PARADISEC, and I am part of the team now to see, as you can see in the exhibition later on, that the primary goal is to basically preserve the materials that otherwise would be lost. And we're talking about legacy recordings from way back, which I'll give you an example of in my discussion. And at the same time, we need to improve access to field recordings, especially to the people and the communities from where they were recorded, and return those materials to people that need to know about, and not just sit in an archive. Thirdly, my experiences of engagement and collaboration with diaspora communities, mainly Melanesia, because that is linked to my cultural ethnic heritage. And you can see on your right here, on your left, my right, Johnny Obed is one of the diaspora community elders and leaders that I've engaged into this family of archives bridging to the communities. But that's important that we need to reach out. So the outreach programs that I am basically doing as my role in PARADISEC is reconnecting recordings of the communities, identifying what they are, and basically sharing that that these recordings exist, and they need to connect the context and content and meanings. And that example is a case study that I did on the outreach for the PNG Paraveta Singers of Canberra. And it's a way of empowering that community and the individuals there of their cultural heritage and the transmission of knowledge and the traditions that they need to uphold. Through my community networks and previous collaborative projects, I connected with Deveni Tamu, who's based in Canberra, and shared some legacy recordings from the MG1 collection, which is Murray Groves, for recordings from the 1950s and 1960s. And these recordings were the first time discovered by the community in Canberra. And the stories behind the recordings now impacted the community that was shared through a podcast that we did in Toksave Culture Talks with Deveni. And the community heard about that, and that actually has evoked the connection to the culture, the music, the language, and initiated this collaboration that I facilitated with Jodie Kell as a response to archival collections. So what's important is not just historic and legacy recordings sitting in an archive. You need to basically respond to those recordings because the meanings, the interpretations of those recordings come out. So the stories have now resulted in 2 episodes of the podcast based on just dealing with the outreach program that we undertook, and it ended up with it was kind of shared openly by even we put it out on social media. That particular outreach reached 10,000 viewers on the YouTube channel. That goes to show that we got ways of cultural revitalization happening. And so that's just giving you some examples of what the motivation is. And the group that I dealt with mainly from the central province of Papua New Guinea, the southern part of Papua New Guinea, and the outreach is still has now got a solid relationships that we have now with communities, and it continues to grow. So I'm just trying to give some ideas of how the outreach programs are going, and I can talk further more after this.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. In fact, the photo that we've left up on the screen there, the ABC came by a few weeks ago to make a little program for the Pacific program, which aired last Thursday, if anyone wants to look it up. And the Paraveta Singers of Canberra introduced that program by singing some of the songs that they've been singing for many years, but they've recently, through the connections with Stephen and with PARADISEC, started singing some other songs that they hadn't heard before, and also started listening to different recordings from different times to compare how songs have changed or indeed remained remarkably the same over decades. Some of the ones we listened to were 50 years apart and people singing the same songs. And in fact, another one of the connections you made, you mentioned Johnny, and we'll turn to Johnny now to talk about that connection that you made through the Toksave podcast. But Johnny, you also had the experience of listening to recordings that you knew some of the language materials that had been gathered and knew that they existed, but you'd never heard some of those old recordings when you first reconnected with them. Do you want to tell us about that time and how that came about?
Thank you, Dr. Amanda. A very good evening to you all. Before I begin, I would like to thank Dr. Jodie Kell, Dr. Amanda Harris, and Mr. Stephen Gagau for introducing me to PARADISEC. I was so moved to learn about some recording done by Dr. Terry Crowley, who was working, write a book and do some recording of short stories from my island called Palma in Vanuatu. You can come there for a holiday. Dr. Crawley was much loved, and at the end of his time wrote a book, The Burmese Language of Vanuatu, and did a number of recordings of short stories from our people. I was so pleased PARADISEC had these recordings, and hearing for the first time, I was humbled and very appreciative for the work done. Of course, listening to some of the recordings, I heard the voice of family members who have passed. The main thing here is to know where the recordings are, and that I was able to hear them right here in Sydney. The creation of PARADISEC plays a vital role in preserving these archives for future generations, and I am just very thankful that right in the heart of Sydney City, part of my cultural heritage is preserved and protected so I can feel right at home here in Sydney. And I think that for me is very, very important, to come here and learn something of my own culture. And thanks to the team here, it is in the work we do, often you have to see the world at large. And because of that, there is an important part to seeing the responsibility we all carry in making sure that such treasures are kept and are ready for use, or also be able for us to share with others and be proud of what we are and who we are. And I think I'll bring that a little bit more in my next section. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Johnny. And Evelyn, this idea of hearing old recordings, I mean, you've done a lot of work with Warlpiri people in Central Australia, and of course that's an area where many recordings and many materials have been collected and gathered and dispersed amongst institutions for many years, and so there's a huge body of things out there that belong to Warlpiri people. What's been your experience of the challenges and benefits of people connecting to old records of different kinds in archives when you've been working with people in Central Australia?
Thank you for the invitation as well. I'm learning a lot because I'm very new in time and also in being involved in different projects as you guys have been. And when I went to, as a new researcher, when I went to Central Australia to work among the Warlpiri people, I remember, so the first thing I took with me was the archival materials, like the songs and the books and the websites, because Warlpiri people have had, like, there are people like Georgia and others working on it. So PARADISEC has been very involved in that too, like creating materials easy to access for them. So I took with me, and we were listening to the songs with the women. And I just, for me, it was like an opening, to a new world, because I could understand what you guys were saying about how it connects with not just I don't know, the musical or the external characteristic, but it connects with the spirit of the people, the voices of the people who they know or they knew, who has passed, or so it has different effects on elders and in young people as well. So in the elders, for instance, they would hear the voices of their own elders, like the elders now, but when they were younger, and they would sing along because they are also very knowledgeable, and they would sing along the songs and remember whose voice is that, and they would remember and reconnect. And for me, it was an experience of seeing reconnection and memory as well, how it comes back because of all the changes that the communities are going through. There is a lot of knowledge that it's being kept and in many cases lost. So this is like a refreshing time for them to come back to it and remember voices, remember stories, remember knowledge. That was very important, and to see how they connect in different realms, really. And for the younger people who have other tools as well, so they would go through the books, for instance. They would go through the books and read the songs, which elders wouldn't be able to do, like, reading the songs or the stories, and they would become familiar, and they would recognize some elders that they have seen before when they were kids. So for me, it was very impacting. And also as a researcher, it was really like a common ground to connect with people, because they didn't know me and I didn't. For me, it was new as well, like to be in that context. So it was really good, this time of engaging in a different, world level and people. Regarding challenges, I would say that I noticed that there is a lot of I don't know what's the word, hunger, probably, to when they see that there are songs about, old songs there, they would come always and ask you, can you play these songs for me, and a specific type of songs, or, that belongs to them. And the challenge that I probably even something that we would need to work on is I found that it's very dependable. Like people depend on someone else to get access to things that are there. As Stephen was saying, he's working on breaking these limitations, and that would be the biggest one, like how to access to it. When I talk about limitation, it means many things: place, location, time, materials, where, computer, phones, tablets, and also the person who will do this for them. And they also want to take home with them. They listen to the songs, they want to take home with them. So I think the most practical thing to do is really to work on a kind of a training for young people, so they can have the tools and the knowledge to access anytime, because internet is available in the community. But knowing where to go, that is hard. And I think when I think on the young people, young generation, I think that will be also a way to make them interested in that type of knowledge, because that's another challenge for the elders, intergenerational challenge.
Yeah, thanks, Evelyn. I wanted to ask you about new recordings you're making as well, but maybe not everyone might know that Lauren's very involved in an Indigenous data collective that is really not just sort of doing the archival work, but really thinking through the theoretical work that needs to be done. What have been the limitations of archives in the past, and how do they need to transform in the future? And I was wondering if Evelyn's comments then raise anything that you'd like to talk to there.
Totally. I mean, immediately I brought this report along with me to remind me just in case in, the panel brain I forgot to mention. But for anyone that, so archives in Australia, I think when we talk about access and use, I think it's really inseparable from talking about the stolen generations in Australia and talking about the Bringing Them Home report. And for people that don't know, the Bringing Them Home report, it was tabled in federal government in 1997. It was a royal commission, from a royal commission into the removal of children from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families. And in that report in 97 was a huge list of recommendations, and quite a large portion of those recommendations related to archives, related to records. It was a really important document for the archives sector. I mean, it's a really important document for everyone. But particularly in the archives and record keeping sector, it positioned archives and showed the importance of records and record keeping for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, particularly for stolen generations, in the need to, for reconnections with community, to family, to country. You know, like records are so vital for this. It's also so vital for truth telling around, as we all know, and this is replicable across a wide range of examples, but so important for truth telling. It's so important as evidence. It's also important to speak back at, because, you know, depending on who is the creator of the records, you know, not every record that we access is going to speak the truth. It's not. It's going to be evidence of something, but what it's evidence of is another conversation. Also, they're incredibly, records in Bring Them Home report were tabled as being, of course, incredibly important to access redress schemes and reparations. So you can't, as an individual, as a community, family, you know, or as a descendant, accessing and being involved in redress is really difficult if you don't have that record and that proof. So anyway, the Healing Foundation has put out this report, and it's called, it's a quote, it's the title of the report. It's called "Are You Waiting for Us to Die?" And it's an evaluation of where the Bringing Them Home report recommendations are currently at, and it's damning, is probably the best thing I can say. And I think it's a really important report, and the Bring Them Home report is also a really important report to return to as well, to see where we're at regarding the recommendations around records. And so just, I am getting to my point to wrap it into Evelyn's, but the verdict when it came to all of the recommendations, of which there are, it's many that relate to records in the Bring Them Home report. The verdict this year was that there's a failure to implement nearly half of the recommendations, including the recommendation to establish the Records Task Force and fund Indigenous traineeships and scholarships for archivists, genealogists, historical researchers, counsellors, and regional Indigenous language and cultural and history centres. And so that's why I bring that up, is that was a recommendation back in 1997, that there needs to be pathways, and there needs to be traineeships and scholarships, and there needs to be a consideration of how we teach archival, the archival discipline, and also is the way that we teach archives and information and record keeping, is it relevant in the kinds of work that we're all speaking about? And I would say the current training, no, it's not. And so there's such an opportunity for what you just said, and I second that entirely. This idea of that there are people in the city that go through the degrees and that sit in the jobs, and that we receive the material and we do it and then we send it back. It's like that's old news, and that it takes away from all kinds of goals around self-determination and I think that it's, and thinking about different ways that, you know, whilst the discipline and the universities, you know, sort out their stuff around training, and that's a lot of the work that we're doing over at UTS, is looking at how can we critically, I guess, intervene in some and offer some alternatives around archival training and traineeships and things. But I also think, thinking about different ways to, supporting community archives, supporting community archivists, skill sharing across the sector. I mean, the discipline and the sector itself has a lot of work to do, and we have so many resources that when it comes to knowledge and practice and that we can share. And I agree with you, Evelyn.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. I mean, Evelyn, we'll come back to Johnny and Stephen in a moment too, but Evelyn, I know that you not only have been taking back old recordings, but you're also making new ones, and young people are involved to varying degrees in that. And so you're creating a new collection in PARADISEC, but will that also be about working with local archives? Could you say more about sort of the other side of what you're doing, not just taking back old recordings, but also making new records of what people value now?
Yes, that's right. I think that has, I see as a continuation, like, of all the people have been doing, you know, all these recordings, and we're just kind of like initiating to see all these things, and And I really see, and I think this comes from the people as well, as a continuation. Like, it wouldn't be possible to do something like that without the work that, other archives being taken. Like, I don't think I would be able. I think the archiving process already done has created trust among the people, like a strong trust in the person and in the people who have recorded. And when they see us like coming to work with cultural knowledge and bringing these archives, they really trust that, and that has been a huge and very important thing for creating new archives and new, recording new stories and new songs.
Yeah, thanks, Evelyn. And I mean, it's so wonderful that has been the case among people you're working with there, because I think, as Lauren was alluding to, it's certainly not always the case that people feel that trust in archives, and that's obviously some of the work still to be done in lots of areas.
I think that's why, when you hear everyone talking about the projects and that they've been working on or that they're involved in and through PARADISEC, it is a different model, particularly when it comes to academic research data and the return of that's not baked into academia. Like, that's not baked into research. The idea that things must go back, like, that's a real, that's kind of flipping the script more recently. That kind of trust that people have with a lot of the incredible, really just fantastic researchers that either come through PARADISEC and the people in the office or the directors and yourself, Amanda, that shows how important it is to have have relationships and have transparency and accountability. Like, that just is, you can't replace that with a policy or a campaign or something or some buying some stuff. Like, it's really the relationships that PARADISEC and smaller community archives and archives are able to build they're so important, and they totally just change. They change the way that we work when you work through that model, that relational way.
Just adding to that as well, talking about trust is really big thing, because they hear that these archival materials are coming and have an impact on them, and they want that for the younger generation as well. So they see that operating on them, and they say, I remember this particular experience with one of the elders when we listened to the songs and the story, and we asked questions about the story that was being played, and she said, I want to listen more, and she listened to it, and when we finished, and she gave us the answers, but she found the answers in the archival materials. At the beginning, she didn't answer, and she's just, I want to hear the stories as well. So she did that, and then she reflected at the end, I think, on 3 important things for me, when she said, it's important for us to remember knowledge, and she was referring to just the experience that she had at that moment. Remember knowledge, and so we are able to keep recording, and we are able to keep recording and give it to, this is the trust part that comes really as a very important thing, record it and to give it to the people. They use the word karia for the non-Aboriginal people, to give it to the karia for them to look the knowledge after for us. And so when she said that, I was like, okay. And she used in her language this word madani, which is preserve, protect, keep, maintain, mind. And so she was giving the same verb that she used when they hold knowledge, to keep it and pass it. They always say, keep knowledge so you can, pass it on. And so she was using the same thing for the archives, for the archival materials, saying like, so they can, the archives saying like, all the people who work archiving, so they can keep it protected for us. So that was very meaningful for me in regards to this.
Thanks for sharing that story, Evelyn. I think I'd love to hear from Johnny on that question as well, of what it is to be, what it means to have access and how that works when so many people there might be people at home on the island, but also as you are dispersed in diaspora community. What's been the experience of how archives support transmission in modern times, but also the complexities of that?
Thank you. I think just before I start, I want to thank everybody who has helped out in collecting the archives for us, and for the work they've done 70 years ago and even 100 years ago up to the present day. These are people we ought to thank, for they are telling a story that belongs to us. We are storytellers. And if we don't have a story to tell, we are really hopeless. We have nothing. Let's think about, just to go a little bit further from what they've talked about, the importance of this from a Pacific cultural view, okay? In Papua New Guinea, we have about 800 languages. In Vanuatu, a population of 400,000 people, about 112 dialects. And in the Solomons, many as well. It's just in Melanesia, not counting the Polynesians. This is a lot of work, a lot of stories. Now, when we hear about climate change, and cultures are now beginning to lose, are on their way out, what do? Don't you feel the pain? I feel it, because I come from there. And I think that's what the challenge I want to leave with you, is where do we find ourselves in the near future? Just to leave it with the people who are archivists, or we can do a little part for ourselves to help out in what we can do. I think in the end that will be, think about Kiribati. The highest hill in the country is 3 meters high, and that will go down. And the people don't want to leave that land because there are many stories of their culture is there. What are we leaving behind? What are we wanting to protect? We want the importance of people knowing about this. That's important. And the next part to it is access. Location, where do we find it? They have some here that you can come over and get them, or listen to, or through podcast. And also the important part to do our part. And I think for me, that's what leaves me every day. Sometimes I get up in the morning with tears in my eyes, not knowing what to do. I'm only Manpama, 1 or 2, 3 of us here in Sydney. But you feel that when you hear a story that people mention about something or some good that has come, or a little celebration. These things move us. These are our stories. This is our world. If the world is going to be a global world, global village, then it counts on all of us to be a part. And I think that's where, for me, the importance of it, the access to it, and the contribution to it is what matters most at this time. And we can write letters to the government to ask for funding for that, and we can do a lot of work we can do. But we must do something. We must do something. So I'll leave you with this one. In my village, women weave baskets. There's a saying like this: make sure you weave that basket stronger so that we can collect water inside it, because that's where we store our knowledge. We have no rivers on the island. You cannot make a mat that can carry water, but it is a saying. So what do? When she is lying sitting on the floor, weaving this strand here and there, and this and that, put a rock here, making it smoother. What is she saying? She's telling a story, saying, I think I need this one as well here, and that's what I need. We are doing it here, up here. We need you to come. Let's weave our story. Let's weave our story. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. Steve, we are going to have some time for some questions shortly, but Stephen, maybe that's a beautiful way to lead into the way you have recently gone back home to East New Britain, and you're also thinking a lot of the time about stories and how people's stories are woven into the archive. Do you want to tell us a bit about that work that you've done going home and asking people what they want to send to PARADISEC to be looked after and making a collection of your own?
Okay, thank you. I'll start by saying that I go home regularly as an insider archivist, meaning that I am not just working in an archive, but I'm a practitioner, meaning I go to live and walk and talk. I went home to set up a project called the East New Britain Digitization and Preservation Project. And that is just recognizing that so many of our people keep old cassette tapes that won't be playable, will be totally obsolete. And we've got legacy recordings in there that goes all the way back to the 60s. And it'll be a shame if that is discontinued for preservation. So I've done this project in 2024. I set up a project team at home. I trained them up on archival principles and preservation. The idea there was to look forward to the future. So I'm working on the archival kind of concepts that let us be responsible in the present to basically have records and preserve the past for the benefit as a resource for the future. So I've brought this concept all the way down to grassroots level so that people can understand that we have valuable information that the future generations need to know of. So just in a summary, I started this project just so that they are aware that we can preserve the materials that they have. There's so much richness of music and language and traditional stories that needs to be kind of preserved and shared for the future. So I did this project successfully because there were 600 cassette tapes collected, and we had to screen that just so that for costing purposes and that's right. I brought about 150 back, left the rest at home, but I just wanted to demonstrate the fact that we can preserve these things in PARADISEC. So stage 2 is digitizing them, and my team here are doing that. So the collection has been done. There's three stages. Digitizing is going to happen, cataloging. Then I will return all that back to the individuals that contributed them in the first place. So this is part of this archival loop that we bring the communities into the archive rather than us getting outsiders doing research, getting materials, bringing them here, and it stays. We need to be kind of proactive with an archival loop concept that we need to promote. So this is done from an indigenous perspective so that they know me, I know them, the trust in the process. So that has happened, and we are in the process of digitizing the ones that I've collected, and then next year we'll look at returning them back. So this is an example of how we can use the archives to engage, access, and collaborate with communities more, and let them be part of the archival community rather than them being on the outside from where that material came from in the first place. So just basically an example of a practical project that can be done by us working in archives.
Thanks, Stephen. That's a lovely way to wrap up some of those discussions. So we have a bit of time now. If anyone has questions they'd like to ask the panel, perhaps you can join me first in thanking you all for those wonderful contributions to the discussions.
That concludes the recording of Opening the Archive, Indigenous Perspectives on the Importance of Engagement with Archives at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music in 2025. We would like to thank the Chair, Amanda Harris, and participants Lauren Booker, Evelyn Gispe, and Johnny Obed.
and also recognising your contributions, Stephen, as an insider-outsider in the archive. We would also like to thank the Sydney Conservatorium of Music Library staff for the opportunity to showcase the work of PARADISEC and to share this discussion about Indigenous perspectives on archiving. The panel covered the importance of good relationships between archives and Indigenous communities to support better archival practices, as well as raising questions about the best way forward for community access. It touched on the role of archives in the future, particularly as many nations face the realities of climate change, and how safeguarding cultural heritage is particularly vital when people are separated from their land.
Toksave Culture Talks was launched as part of the United Nations Year of Indigenous Languages in 2019.
We would like to acknowledge the support of LDACA, the Language Data Commons of Australia, the ARDC, the Australian Research Data Commons, the Australian Research Council's Centre of Excellence for the Dynamics of Language, and the University of Sydney, the University of Melbourne, and the Australian National University, and a special thank you to the Sydney Conservatorium of Music Library.